prophecy of the Chosen One is a topic that is still debated to this day. Was it Anakin or was it Luke? But what if it was Obi-Wan? And were the Jedi the real villains of the prequel movies? Welcome to Star Wars Uplink, your place for everything Star Wars gaming, the TV shows, and the movies. Let's jump in.
Just you reconsider playing that message for him.
So I like to peruse the various online forums, going deep into the histories of theories online in Star Wars. And I stumbled on this one on the Star Wars theory subreddit. The one where a bunch of fans get together and they pose various theories from crazy to actually pretty interesting. And this is one that I found that I just thought would be a really good discussion.
Sure.
Was Obi-Wan the true Chosen One?
Tell me more. I'm curious.
If you think about it, Obi-Wan was there through the whole process of Anakin. He was also the person that empowered Luke Skywalker to take his journey. So he's been a pivotal role throughout Star Wars, throughout the decades and the prequels and the original trilogy, and even continued to guide Luke Skywalker after his death. Mm-hmm. So the theory poses that he's the actual Chosen One because of those actions. So without him, the galaxy wouldn't have gone the way that it did.
Interesting.
Because without Obi-Wan, there wouldn't have been anyone to train Anakin.
Right.
To therefore have Luke Skywalker, who therefore defeated Emperor Palpatine once.
The first time.
Yes, the first time.
Okay. That's an interesting way of looking at things, because usually, like, when we think of like the prophecy, we think, oh, this is all about the main characters and the people who are actually doing the things, and not necessarily the wizened teachers and things. So I think that's interesting. I think that's I don't think I'm following it quite to their degree of being like, no, this could be it. Because
that's most of the theories. I'm like, okay, sure, pal. But I thought it would be fun to just theorize of like even just taking it to the idea of like, what if Obi-Wan was the Chosen One? Right. Like, what would that have looked like too?
So ultimately, the Chosen One is one that brings balance to the Force.
Mm-hmm. Which
is such a loaded thing to say.
Because if you look at the Jedi's view of balance in the Force, it is an eradication of all of the Sith.
All of the evil.
All of the evil.
All the darkness. Which is impossible.
If you look at like the Sith, balance would be more strength for the Sith. They've actually intentionally structured the Sith to bring more balance within their ranks because of the rule of two.
Right.
There are only so many Sith at one point that would be in operation. So there's like a self-contained balance within the Sith.
Unlike the Jedi.
Yeah.
Quick, grab all the ones we can get and make
let's
a
take
giant
all these
army
kids from their families and train them.
Yeah. We'll make a giant army of good. That's not balance.
True balance would be equal powers of both good and evil. That is the true balance to the Force. And maybe it is strength-wise, there are only 2 Sith, and then strength-wise for the Jedi, that would have to be like 10 to 15 Jedi. We don't know.
That's true.
Again, and we've talked about this in the past, the only real example of Sith that we have in Star Wars is pretty much Palpatine.
That's it.
He is in the prequel trilogy, he's in the original trilogy, and he's in the sequel trilogy. Yeah. In canon, we don't actually have a whole lot outside of Palpatine in terms of the Sith. In Legends, there's a completely different idea. There are tons of various Jedi and Sith throughout the decades, the centuries, and the millennia, really. Because if you go all the way back to Knights of the Old Republic, that is thousands of years before anything in terms of the Skywalker saga takes place. So there are tons of various Sith in Star Wars and Legends, but it's literally Palpatine and Vader and maybe Darth Maul and Count Dooku if you count them, but they aren't really like true versions of the Sith.
Yeah, they're kind of variations of Sith-esque teachings.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to Obi-Wan. I think it's really interesting that they would pick him out as, like, maybe he's the chosen one, because even when Luke is around, and it's pretty much just Luke, we still have Yoda for a good portion of it. Like, there's still other teachers.
Yeah.
So I think that's an interesting way. I mean, maybe it's just because Obi-Wan is so close to these key figures, to the people who are traditionally considered the chosen people. Maybe that's why they're drinking so closely to him.
Yeah. If you look at it and really think about it, Obi-Wan is one of the best examples of the Jedi. Like, he truly embodies so much of what the Jedi stand for. And I would even say he rivals Yoda in a lot of the ways that he perceives the Force and actually utilizes his powers in the Force. Like, he is the almost perfect Jedi in many ways. The way that he approaches the world and he actually goes through the stories, he is like one of the best Jedi.
Yep.
He doesn't have a whole lot of the baggage of someone like Mace Windu in terms of like his actions and perceptions on things, a lot of the prejudices that the Jedi Council have, and he ultimately wants to do good for the galaxy, so much so that he steps away from it to protect and watch over Luke Skywalker.
Yeah. In that way, in the way of him being so truly a Jedi, I could see him being the balance, because it's like you have the true Jedi, the truest Jedi versus the truest darkness sort of thing. Like, there is that balance in him. Whether or not he's bringing that, it's another story. But
he definitely represents some really good balance, because even if you look at like the Clone Wars and his actions throughout the Clone Wars, I mean, he makes some questionable decisions. He makes some decisions that wouldn't be questioned by the Jedi in terms of like his relationship with, like, is it Satine?
I believe it is Satine.
Yeah, Satine. And just like stepping away from it, but he ultimately does step away from it, and he loses someone he cares deeply for, and it doesn't corrupt his character.
Yes.
So he's not like someone who's never faced that kind of those struggles and just was easily able to be perfect. He was facing with struggles. He was constantly questioning and constantly put into a position to be questioned, and ultimately he stayed true to his beliefs.
I think another good example of him just being the truest Jedi is even just in his moment when he's fighting Grievous, and he has to take up the gun,
the blaster,
and him being like so uncivilized. Like, he's literally looking at the gun being like, I cannot believe I just used this to defeat this person. Like, this is so not the Jedi way. Like, even just that little line is like, you're just a Jedi through and through. Like, there's nothing anyone can say that's like you're not. He just embodies all their teachings.
Yes. And honestly, that's why he's become such a fan favorite character, is because of the actions that he has in all aspects of his perceptions through the galaxy. His a little bit of like disdain for flying, his like he wants to help people. He wants to be in those positions in the galaxy to actually make impacts and change, and he does that in various ways in the way that he approaches the world that he's in.
Does he bring balance to the Force, though?
From a certain point of view, maybe. And like that's the key part of it, of like, from a certain point of view. He coined that phrase.
Right, and he certainly has a huge hand in the shaping of the future of the Force and the future of the galaxy, and like what happens to the Jedi and whatnot. So yeah, if you want to look at it that way, sure. But I would probably say he's not the chosen one. Like, he's not the one going in doing the things and bringing order back and all this. So
I would even question, and this is probably a topic for a completely different episode of the podcast or video, but I would even question, like, if Anakin was the actual chosen one.
I question that too.
Because does he truly bring balance to the Force? Not really. Is he a domino that falls to help bring balance to the Force? You could argue yes for that in terms of like Luke Skywalker. But ultimately, though, even what Luke didn't actually succeed, as we see in the sequel trilogy. Yeah. So the Force of... I mean, you could even kind of look at Rey in that position because, technically she had parents. She was not raised by them. So if you look at the whole idea of like becoming the chosen one, not having a born of no father kind of thing, I think is the line that's used there. I don't know if they actually ever specifically say the full prophecy. They just utilize it as like this tool.
Yeah.
You could say that Rey was the actual chosen one. But again, so much up to interpretation there.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah, and like ultimately, what is balance? What was the balance that needed to be adjusted here? Was it a more grand scheme of like the pantheon of the Force, or was it more of like what was actually happening in the galaxy?
Yeah,
there's so much of it that it's prophecy. It's just prophecy. There's no right or wrong with prophecy. There's just interpretation.
Exactly. And Luke ultimately like became such a huge user of the Force. If we look at the Last Jedi and his sacrifice and his like Force projection, like using so much of his powers to accomplish this thing to where he just became part of the Force, I think that's interesting to look at as well. But talking about all these various Jedi and the stories and the prophecies, I did see something that sparked this idea of like, were the Jedi the real villains this whole time? Of like, if you really think about it, if you look at Anakin and if you look at the ways that Anakin became Darth Vader, it was because of the hubris and the pride and the structure of the Jedi that ultimately forced him down the path that became the thing that destroyed the Jedi.
Yeah.
So were the Jedi the villains?
Oh, certainly from a certain standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, from Anakin's point of view, the Jedi are wrong.
Yeah, the Jedi are the problem. I think it's a really interesting question because we all like someone to blame. The Jedi were certainly far down a path they could not turn back from.
Yes.
Their
whole structure was built to embody this. There was no changing. Yeah,
there became this rigidity that you would normally see in something like the Sith. There is this really strong connection to this gain of power and...
Well, they really feared Anakin. They felt the fear within Anakin, and they feared what he would do, which ultimately fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to the dark side.
Yeah.
So, like, if you look at it, the failings that they had was because of the fear and the, I wouldn't say anger, but like, I don't know, like disbelief within Anakin that made him question himself even further to make him even deeper into the insecurities that he had because of the fears that they held and also the fears of what the chosen one would actually do to the Jedi.
It's true. I think there was, and yeah, just thinking about the prophecy again, it really does strike home about like they were afraid of that prophecy. Like they did not know what that actually meant.
Oh yeah.
And they could not deny that Anakin was something. Like they needed, and I think they definitely wanted to mold him. But at the same time of molding him, they created this horrible creature at the same time.
If you look at the way that the Jedi are created, if you look at the path that they have taken to build their ranks, they are kings of persuasion and control. They take the kids as when they're very young, when they're identified to be force sensitive, and then they take them away from their like family influence. They're taken away from every single thing that they know and they're basically brainwashed into this cult.
Yes.
That's the process that the Jedi use to increase their ranks.
Yeah, in a way, the Sith are much more humane because they're like, come to us when you're ready. Come to us when you want to prove yourself, when you want to test your strength and rise to this occasion sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like, it's not a loss of identity. It's a come at me, bro, sort of thing. It's a lot more holistic in a way.
Yeah, it's like farm raised versus like actually like wild caught or whatever.
Now, oftentimes, I think, well, maybe not often, but there's definitely a falling away from the Jedi to the Sith, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You often see that in underdogs, and like,
Yeah.
you see that with, I don't know, people coming into this like greater realization of something.
Mm-hmm.
So for putting the Jedi as the bad people,
Yeah.
that's fascinating. Like, to be like, no, I'm coming out of this cult. I'm coming out of this way of thinking, and I'm actually grown into like wanting to seek my full potential. Like, there's this like pursuit of self and
Yeah.
identity that the Jedi are squandering and they're like suppressing. Fascinating.
And if you look at it too, like obviously not the Jedi, but Mandalorian seasons 1 and 2, it was really leaning into this perspective of like, oh hey, this specific sect of the Mandalorians, they're just a religious cult. And the whole path that it seemed like it was leading down was, let's just kind of like basically de-influence from that cult. Again, they removed all of that growth in season 3, which was something that was very frustrating. Like, the whole point was like, as Grogu stepped away from his path in this cult over here as the Jedi, where he would have to separate himself from everything, that was a mirrored path by Din Djarin of like stepping away from this perspective of like a cult that he was raised in that made him who he is, but also to a point where it separated himself from actually becoming connected to someone else. So in a lot of ways, The Mandalorian and the Jedi in The Mandalorian seasons 1 and 2 was this path of like redemption from their traumatic or religious cultish kind of experiences to get into this wider world where they can make more of an impact.
So, very interesting that that's the story that we're given nowadays versus the same stuff was still happening in the prequels and in the main trilogy. I mean, like, this is what the Jedi were all about. So it's so fascinating that I mean, we can definitely see them as the bad guys because it's just all of a frame of reference. Like, because we're seeing this cultish thing.
We're seeing the fall of Anakin. We're seeing him become unsupported in his ways, and the ways that he is lacking support ultimately leads him down this path. But if someone just like, hey, dude, it's okay. You don't have to hide this. You don't have to do this. You don't have to do like. There is support here.
If they just had Jedi therapists.
Yeah, if they had Jedi therapists, everything would have been fine, and we wouldn't have had this.
If we could have like acknowledged what we were feeling and talk it out, and
Palpatine would have been defeated right then and there. Order 66 would have never happened, and it would have been a perfect family of Anakin, Padme, and Luke and Leia.
Beautiful.
But because of trauma,
and lack of support systems,
it all failed. But if you look at it, like, this is taking a lot of George Lucas's perspectives on like established Hollywood studios and the path that he wanted to take with his movies. He's mirrored that in his art, like in the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, of like the Jedi being this thing, and ultimately it's very fascinating, and there's a lot of like things to appreciate with something along those lines, but it's not necessarily something like you can totally see Anakin as a part of George Lucas going and looking at the big studios and then ultimately trying to self-finance for The Empire Strikes Back and stepping away from the Directors Guild, stepping away from like all these various organizations that are built to control in certain ways and aspects. That is how Anakin is perceiving the Jedi. Of like, this is the Institute where I have to go outside of the Institute to achieve the thing that I need, which is protecting my family. Like, that's ultimately the thing that brings him to the brink, is like, I need to protect what I have.
Yeah.
And the system that I'm a part of right now doesn't allow me to do that.
Yeah. That's fascinating. And ultimately, it's really not about good and evil and right and wrong. Like, it's just a matter of a man seeing what it is that he determines is the most important thing and just trying to achieve that. You know, I mean,
yeah.
I mean, that's horrible that he did go and kill all these people.
I mean, he killed a lot of people. He killed some
bad.
children, so there's some very bad things.
There's some very bad things.
Let's cancel him for that.
Yes. Yes. Throw him out. But there is this, I don't know, there is this kind of, there is still good in him. Maybe that's the thing.
Which we ultimately see
Right.
by the end of the original trilogy. And Return of the Jedi, that is ultimately what Luke Skywalker sees, of like, there is still good in him. And there is still good within the Jedi. And there are various things that the Jedi do very well. But in a lot of ways, they are the villain of the story. If you look specifically within the prequels, they are the villain. Like, Anakin, our hero is Anakin. And we ultimately see the ways that the system fails him in every step of the way.
Yeah.
And yeah, if they just had therapists like they have in Mandalorian. Obviously, the one in Mandalorian is a robot and probably wouldn't have worked very well. But if they had some therapists, maybe, just maybe, everything would have been perfectly fine.
Just maybe.
Yes. But let us know your thoughts on these theories and your perspectives on the Jedi being the villains as well as Obi-Wan being the chosen one. Let us know in the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube, or contact at uplinkpodcast.com if you're listening to this wherever you find podcasts. As always, thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you.